Okay, what if I told you that two of the most iconic stories in the Quran, Noah's Ark and Jonah and the whale, aren't actually separate stories at all? What if they're two parts of the same story? Today, we're driving into a really fascinating theory that connects these two prophets in a way that might just change how you see everything. So let's just get right to it. Here's the central question. Was the prophet Jonah actually the son of the prophet Noah? Now, I know, that's a bold claim. It sounds a little out there, but the argument for it is built on a really close and maybe unconventional reading of the Quranic text itself. So let's walk through the evidence together. All right, so the first piece of this whole puzzle starts with Noah's son, the one who famously refused to get on the ark. According to this theory, his story didn't end when the floodwaters rose. In fact, that was just the beginning of a whole new and very unexpected chapter. I mean, this is such a powerful, almost heartbreaking moment in the story. You can just feel the desperation in Noah's voice, can't you? He's pleading with his son, but the son, so sure that he can save himself, tragically rejects the only real path to safety. And here's where the specific wording becomes so important. Notice, Noah doesn't call his son a disbeliever, a kafir. He warns him not to be with the disbelievers. The argument here is that this is a crucial distinction. It suggests the son's real sin wasn't a total lack of faith, but a rebellious choice to side with the wrong crowd and trust his own plan over God's. So the big question is, what happens to this rebellious son after the waves crash over him? Well, this is where the story takes a really dramatic turn, connecting the waters of the flood directly to the belly of the whale. To get a handle on what might have happened to Noah's son, the Quran gives us this really fascinating comparison between two other people who faced drowning, Jonah and Pharaoh. And it's pretty stark, right? Pharaoh, who was called a corrupter, was drowned. End of story. But Jonah, called a praiser, was saved. So the argument goes, Noah's son must have also been, deep down, a praiser, which means his fate wasn't just to drown, it was to face a completely different kind of trial. And here is that trial. We all know Jonah's famous prayer of repentance, but I want you to pay really close attention to the word used to describe where he is, the darknesses, plural. What exactly were these darknesses? Now, typically, the darknesses is understood to be, a triple whammy, the whale, the deep sea, and the darkness of night. Makes sense. But this interpretation points to a stunning parallel. The Quran uses almost the exact same language to describe Noah's flood. Waves topped by clouds, darknesses, one above another. The claim here is just incredible, that Jonah's prayer wasn't from inside a whale in a normal ocean, but from within the chaotic, layered darkness of the great flood itself. Okay, the next piece of evidence is all about timelines. It connects Noah and Jonah by looking at something really unique about their respective communities. Now, the Quran says something very, very specific about the people of Jonah. Get this. They are the only community in history that believed at the very last second and were actually saved from destruction. And because of that, they were granted enjoyment for a time. Remember that exact phrase. It's key. Okay, now listen to this verse from Noah's story. As he's getting off the ark, God tells him that there will be other nations who will be granted enjoyment before their punishment. Did you catch that? The phrase grant enjoyment comes from the exact same Arabic root, mata, that was used for the people of Jonah. That's a direct, undeniable linguistic link. So let's just connect the dots here. If the Quran says Jonah's people were the only ones granted this special enjoyment, and then God turns around and tells Noah that a nation just like that exists right after the flood, well, the conclusion from this reading is kind of unavoidable, right? They have to be the same people, which puts Jonah's community squarely in the same time period as Noah. Now, this entire theory, it doesn't just hang on connecting verses. It actually hinges on re-examining the meaning of some key Arabic words that maybe we've taken for granted. Let's look at a couple of quick examples. So, when Jonah is thrown out of the whale, the Quran describes him as sakim. This is usually just translated as sick or ill, but this interpretation suggests a much deeper meaning. Someone who is earnestly seeking spiritual guidance after making a huge mistake. So he wasn't just physically unwell, he was in the state of deep repentance, totally ready to find the right path. And what happens in this moment of spiritual seeking? God causes a tree of gourd to grow over him. The source here points out a fascinating linguistic link between the word for gourd, yakdeen, and the word for certainty,
yaqeen. It's seen as a symbol, the tree of certainty, representing the exact moment prophethood was given to him, after his trial and his repentance were complete.
So let's bring this all back to Noah. If his son really was saved and was destined for prophethood, then how on earth do we make sense of that desperate conversation Noah has with God about his drowning son? So Noah calls out to God, and he's totally heartbroken and confused. He's basically saying, "My Lord, my son is my family, my achli. You promised to save my family, and your promise is always true. So what is happening right now?"
And God's reply seems so definitive, almost harsh, doesn't it? He is not of your family. And this is often understood as a kind of spiritual disownment. But what if that word family, or ahal, has a different meaning in this specific context?
Well, here's the thing. While ahl definitely means family, it's used all over the Quran to mean people of a specific group, like Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. So the interpretation here is that God wasn't saying he's not your son anymore. He was saying he is not of the people of the ark. His destiny, his path lies somewhere else. So in the end, God wasn't actually breaking his promise. He was correcting Noah's assumption. It's like he was telling him, you don't have the full picture. Your son's salvation was never going to happen on this ark. According to this view, God's promise was fulfilled, just not in the way Noah expected. It was fulfilled through a different miracle for a much greater purpose.
And that brings our whole explainer to a close. Now, whether you're convinced by this or not, this interpretation really forces us to look closer at the text. It reminds us that behind these stories we think we know so well, there might be layers of meaning we haven't even begun to uncover. And it leaves us with this final thought. How can the potential meaning of a single word, when you re-examine it, totally change an entire story?